What is up, team? Welcome back to the show. Today, I am joined by William Grazione. William, thank you so much for being here, man.
You're welcome, man. It's obviously a pleasure to connect with you. I know we were just talking off air for a little bit, but it's awesome to see the things that you're doing in the industry. And I'm just here to provide value to whoever happens to tune in to your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have been going down a deep rabbit hole of your content over the last few months. I've taken a ton from that. So I was really excited to get you on the show and be able to kind of share that with the listener as well. So, first of all, for the listeners who may not know, can you kind of give us a quick background on who you are and what you're up to?
Sure, yeah. My name is William Grazione. I hold a bachelor's degree in nutrition and exercise science. I'm the owner of The Educated Dieter. I'm the founder of Advanced Coaching Systems, which is more of an educational platform. I'm also the host of a podcast called Hey Coach Radio. And I'm the owner of, like I said, The Educated Dieter, where we specialize in nutrition coaching, helping people with complete health and body composition transformation.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. Now, you kind of established yourself in a different realm in the industry where I know you kind of started, if I'm correct, as more of a prep coach than anything else. And then it seems very much you've made a shift towards you still get people shredded quite often, it seems. But alongside that, really putting individuals' health at the forefront and kind of approaching dieting and the way we approach physique transformation as a whole in a different way. Can you kind of speak to like what caused that initial shift to you where it was like something that I'm doing needs to change? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So when I flash back to 2010 when I started, so 13 years ago, I started coaching people for competition because after I graduated with my degree, I moved back home. And inside of the gym that I was personal training out of, I realized that a lot of the personal trainers did not know much about nutrition, dieting, fat loss, body transformation in general. And so I quickly realized that I had a specific, unique level of knowledge that I had acquired via my time in academia, as well as basically mentoring under people like Dr. Joe Klemczewski, Lane Norton, Dave Gooden, and a lot of other people from back then on the bodybuilding.com forums that had put out really awesome information. And I used that information actually, Jeremiah, to prep myself for my very first natural bodybuilding competition. I was done playing football in college. I wasn't going to the NFL. And I'm like, look, I need something to fulfill this competitive need. And competed in my first show in college playing football. I was like 220 pounds, somewhere around there. And on stage, I was 173 or 175. So I lost almost
Damn.
60 pounds to get ready for that first show. And I actually ended up winning the overall.
Okay.
And from that point, people just started asking me to help them. They're like, hey, Will, like I saw what you did. I saw the way you looked. You won first. You won the overall. That's crazy for your very first show. So, help me. And I was like, okay. And at that point, I didn't even think that nutrition coaching was well, at least could be a job because I didn't know anybody that was actually doing it. Right. I was a personal trainer. I was a janitor. I was a martial arts instructor all in the same day. Right. So I'm
Okay.
wearing all these different hats. And I remember I started to work with clients. And after about 18 months of coaching people for absolutely free, I had 4 people that had turned pro already. And I thought to myself, I must be pretty good at this. So then I said, hey, all my current like 15, 18 clients that I had, I said, are you okay if I charge you $100? And they're like, what took you so long? And so from therefore, I realized that this was an actual career, at least it could be. And oftentimes, sometimes, and I'm sure your audience will get a lot of value out of this, but sometimes you just need somebody to believe in your dream for
Mhm.
you it to actually become real. And Lane Norton was the very first person that I had ever met that was doing what I was doing full time. And I was like, holy crap, man, like you've actually made a business out of this. And I remember he told me something 13 years ago, and I will never forget it. He said, Will, if you're really good and you do right by people, you'll always have clients. And I stuck to that. And the thing is that for the first 5 years of my coaching business, all I did was work with physique athletes.
Okay.
That was it. It was an ego driven space where you're trying to stack up the number of overall championships you can win, the number of pro cards you can attain, the number of world titles that your clients could achieve. You're flying to a show or driving to a show literally at least 2 to 3 times a month. And it's a lot of work, you know what I mean? And it was amazing to be able to help so many people turn professional and win world championships and all of that. However, something that I quickly noticed, which was around 2014, I had this epiphany. And the epiphany was, in every sport I've ever played in my life, there was a halftime. I said, how come in bodybuilding, there's no halftime in prep? Right? Because ultimately, right, like what's the purpose of a halftime? If you watch college football, you watch the NFL, right? What is the purpose? The team gets a break, right? They get to refuel, they get to re-energize, they get to talk their strategy over with the coach. If the strategy isn't working, they get to revise a new strategy, and essentially they can go out in the second half and kick ass, right?
Right.
Implement the idea of a diet break. Right. So I said, well, heck, if these people have, 16 weeks to prep for this show and I need 2 weeks on the side, they're going to be dieting for, two chunks of 7 weeks at a time or something like that. Right. And then I'll give them a 2 week diet break in the middle so we can basically refuel, recharge, talk about the plan, talk about all that stuff. And then we can reignite them to basically finish strong. And that was when the idea, the concept of a diet break came into play. And what I
Okay.
noticed was through you utilizing diet breaks in 2014, 15, 16, I started to get some really good biofeedback data via a questionnaire that I had created back in, 2015 or 16, I think. The questionnaire was simple. It was, how do you feel now? And how do you feel after? And the results of that Word doc were incredible. And I said, well, if you guys feel this much better doing these things, I have to implement them. I listened to the people, right? There was a problem. People were stalling out in prep. People weren't getting as lean as I thought they should. Women were losing their periods. And I'm like, why? What the hell's going on? I didn't know, right? So then ultimately that led me to being very curious. And so being curious ultimately led me to finding new things that worked. And so, then I started to implement diet breaks back then. And then ultimately that led me into, I think 2016 was the year where 2016, 17 were the years where I basically said, look, I've kind of had enough. Like it was at the point where a lot of women started to develop health problems, right? Like
Okay.
you're pushing them so hard that maybe they are losing their cycle a couple months out from a show. And then no matter what you do, you can try to reverse diet them perfectly, but they're not responding the way that they should. So I knew immediately there's something going on. And I think it was 2017. I had a very big influx of women because I think I had made like a YouTube video and some social media content around this thing, but it was regarding the very, very studied relative energy deficiency in sport, right?
Hmm.
And this is typically done in like female track athletes and stuff like that. It used to be called the female athlete triad, but then they switched it to red S. And I started to read a lot of this research and I started to make some content about it. Next thing I know, that year, 2017, I helped over 40 women regain their cycles
Damn.
after they had lost them working with other coaches that I knew what they were doing. It's like 1,000 calorie diet, 2 hours of cardio a day. There's no breaks. There's no refeed days. There's no nothing. We're pushing the gas and we're not taking the foot off the gas until the show. Right.
Right.
And ultimately, I helped a lot of people regain their health. And I said, this feels so good. And I don't know anybody else that's doing this. I think I need to kind of be the voice of reason here for a lot of these bikini prep or figure prep ladies that were having issues with their hormones. And so then 2018, 2019, 2020 comes. And now ultimately, I've basically left the bodybuilding and physique development space almost in a sense. I still work with some people that are like world champions and stuff like that I've been working with for 5 years or more. But the majority of my clients at this point in time are people that just want to look great, feel great, and eat enough to not be starving all the time and have a balanced hormonal profile. So, in a long way to kind of address your question, it started by me just noticing a problem, and then I took it upon myself to create a solution over the next 3 to 5 years.
That's incredible. It's super cool to hear how, again, I know we talked about this off air, but how kind of ahead of the curve you were. Because 2014,
Yeah.
2015, I don't think anyone was talking about diet breaks or anything of that nature. But it's cool to see that you were able to just like, hey, we're getting out of just calorie deficit, hours of cardio
Hmm.
every day. I want to try to find a way to do things better. And it seems like you very effectively like kind of pioneered that. So that's incredible. And really that's what I want this whole conversation to be around is kind of what you and your entire team at the Educated Dieter have found to be the best practices for helping women lose body fat while maintaining health along the way. So to kind of follow up on that, first, can you explain to us why spending a large portion of your adult life dieting could be detrimental to your ability to lose body fat?
Yeah, sure. So the concept of adaptive thermogenesis is the first thing that kind of pops up in my brain. And I'll say, in short, the more you diet, the more adaptive your metabolism is throughout the duration of your life, right? So I don't think it's any coincidence that a lot of people that we get with hormone issues or weight loss resistance problems are already in their 30s and their 40s, right?
Right.
Kind of hard to create a lot of problems in your teens and your 20s because you're healthy. You're just getting started. You know what I mean?
Right.
But once you go from graduating from high school and then you start to get out into the world and stress starts to hit you, your lifestyle changes. Maybe you're drinking all the time, you're going out, you're not prioritizing your health. Then by the age of 30, it's like, okay, I definitely am not dieting the way that I used to in my 20s, my, 25 years old or whatever. And typically what we end up seeing is the more somebody diets, the harder it gets for them to continue to oxidize body fat. And that could be for a myriad of reasons. But I guess what I want to mention is our profiles are different. So, why men and women would want to diet differently is that our profiles are different. What I mean by that is men and women both have testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. Men, however, are testosterone dominant, meaning that we are more androgenic. Our hormones don't necessarily change from month to month unless we decide to start treating our body like crap, right? Like as a man, your testosterone is even keeled. It's pretty much, it stays at baseline as long as you're taking care of yourself. But it can be negatively influenced by lifestyle factors such as what you're putting into your body, how much stress you're under, how much sleep you're acquiring, whether or not you're resistance training, just your overall quality of life. For women, on the other hand, they're actually estrogen and progesterone driven, right? And estrogen and progesterone are the two hormones that basically make women women, and testosterone is the hormone that makes a man a man. So if you've ever read that book, like women are from what is it? Women are from men are from Mars, women are from Venus, or whatever. The reality of the situation is our hormones make us different, right?
Okay.
But it's the ratios of them that actually make us different. Okay. And so, with that being said, I guess you have to identify what would be the optimal ranges, but optimal is going to be different for everybody. What I take a look at is if somebody is symptomatic of having negative biofeedback, there's a problem. Now, when we're addressing biofeedback, we're typically sending out something called a metabolic stress questionnaire. And ultimately, we're acquiring data from that individual to see what's actually going on. Sometimes it's a weight loss resistance problem. Sometimes it's a gut microbiome problem where they're experiencing a lot of constipation or bloating or whatever. And sometimes, maybe they're having insulin resistance and they just keep gaining body fat. Maybe they're gaining body fat in specific areas in which that may be correlated to estrogen dominance. But there's a lot of different things that separate men from women. What I'll say is that women do not respond the same to stress. A male's ability to have a lot of testosterone and or a lot of bioavailable testosterone, meaning that men are producing testosterone, but ultimately our genetics can essentially dictate where that testosterone goes. You understand? Kind of like a fork in the road, right? So if we're producing a lot of testosterone, that's fantastic. Like, I'll give you an example. My natural testosterone fluctuates anywhere between like 750 to 850. I would beg to say probably in my early 20s, it was probably over 1,000. I've just always had high testosterone, right? However, I also realized in the last 4 years that I am actually, because of my lifestyle and stuff like that, I'm a high estrogen converter. Okay. My whole family's very overweight. Okay. When I say overweight, I don't mean, oh, you're just a little heavier. I mean, they're overweight, right? My uncle was 300 pounds. My grandpa was 300 pounds. My mom at one point was tipping close to probably 270, 280. Me and my sister, both growing up, were larger kids. And so there was a lot of things that I had to take into consideration. But ultimately, when I learned that, I could then say, okay, well, what can I do to actually improve my lifestyle factors? What can I do to supplement so that I can basically make sure that I'm binding all the testosterone that I'm creating, which ultimately makes our hormonal profile better as a male. We have less like hormonal side effects and things like that, such as maybe it's like depression, anxiety, weight gain, specifically like the lower chest, the lower stomach, the love handles, the lower body, more estrogenic like body fat patterning. Um, and so I guess the thing is that the testosterone, the higher testosterone, makes us more resilient to stress, right?
Okay.
It improves our resilience. What I mean by that is we can handle stress better than women. When women get put under stress, if it's chronic and it's drawn out over time, maybe they stopped taking care of themselves or whatever, the calming hormone progesterone can begin to plummet. It drops. As a side effect of progesterone dropping, you put yourself in a position where you can start to risk relative estrogen dominance. What I mean by that in relation to relative is estrogen progesterone ratio becomes imbalanced and estrogen becomes the dominant hormone. If and when this happens, ultimately women can find themselves in a position where they may start to gain fat, but a lot of things like haven't really changed. So they're not really exercising any differently. Maybe they're not even eating more calories, but they start to actually gain body fat because internally they don't have their health in check. And I'll leave the health in air quotes because we'll identify that later.
Okay. So it sounds like stress is one of the largest, and the difference between the way men and women respond to stress, or like the difference in resiliency to stress, is one of the biggest reasons why we shouldn't just look at like, all right, we're going to diet all our female clients exactly the same as our male clients, right? There's other things, lifestyle factors we need to take into
Yeah.
consideration.
Let's use a practical application takeaway
Okay.
from it. How often do you have men stall in fat loss?
Not that frequently.
How
Typically
often
pretty
do you
easy.
have women stall in fat loss?
A lot more frequently.
Yeah. They don't handle the stress the same. Again, most men, we can get ourselves down to like 10 to 13% body fat, maybe 14%, look athletic, and our everything's fine.
Right.
I'd say 95% of the labs that I see that come through my email inside of the Educated Dieter, they're women.
Okay.
And the MSQs that we get back, I don't think I've ever had a guy over 25. Now, the
Okay.
way that we gauge if somebody has hormone dysfunction or a hormone imbalance is, are you 25, 30, or more? The 25 or 30 or more is typically all females. And essentially, it's because they forced these adaptations on their body for so long that now they're in a position where they have weight loss resistance. All right.
Okay.
So no matter what they do, they're trying, but they're not seeing the results that they want.
Okay. And would you say, so it sounds like, again, a lot of hormonal dysregulation, things of that nature that you're seeing with women specifically. Is that a product more of the resiliency to stress, or in part like chronic dieting and that in itself being a stress? I'm guessing these are two things that kind of go hand in hand. Are you seeing this as primarily being a result of basically what I'm asking of like chronic dieting, just inability to manage lifestyle stressors, or a combination of these things?
Yeah. So the issue is that they're not as resilient to stress as we are.
Right.
Right. Like, oh, okay. If we go train, you train legs, right?
Hmm.
You know the feeling of walking out of the gym being like, holy, like that was a brutal leg day, right?
Right.
However, half an hour later, you're probably okay,
Right.
right? A woman on the other side, because essentially once we put some carbohydrate in our body, we can calm ourselves down. We go from being in that sympathetic dominant high stress situation to being right back into a parasympathetic state within a relatively short period of time. It's almost like a very steep climb to stress, and then it drops off, and now we're rest, recover, digest, right?
Right.
However, women on the other side, it's almost like they stay elevated for what could be hours, and then they
Right.
slowly start to come down. But again, it's just because of the resiliency of, the lack of resiliency in comparison to a male. Now, I will say that there are some women that are very androgen dominant like women, meaning
Mhm.
that their body structure is more like this, right? You've seen a woman with wide shoulders and she's jacked, right?
Right. Right.
Probably natural as well. But you've always also seen a woman that's the complete opposite. Small clavicles across the top, very wide in the hips, right? And the two dramatically different body structures, one of them has the propensity to build a lot of muscle, while the other one may not. Okay. Or maybe she has propensity to only build a lot of muscle in her lower body. The reason I bring that up is because there are kind of subdivisions inside of what I'm talking about,
Hmm.
i.e., a woman has a normal female hormonal profile. But then if you go a little bit higher on the androgenic side, well, guess what? They probably have a greater ability to build muscle. You go a little bit more on the estrogenic side, well, they probably have the ability to gain more body fat than the normal woman, right? Men are the same way. Men can be super alpha androgen dominant men, right? You see them all on social media. I'm not talking about the ones that are on roids though, but maybe the ones that are natural, that are just naturally jacked. But then you also have men that, like I said, maybe they're high estrogen converters or high DHT converters. They're losing their hair. They have narrow clavicles. They carry a lot of weight in their chest, in their lower back, and their hips and their stomachs. They're more estrogen converting men. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes complete
Right.
sense. Okay.
Yeah. So there's subcategories of each category. But in terms of what you're saying as far as stress, it's lifestyle driven. A lot of it is. But a lot of the things that I want people, well, a lot of the main picture that I want people to grab a hold of is the fact that a lot of women that are experiencing these issues, they really don't know that they're under eating and they're under recovering. They're not eating enough vitamins and minerals. They're not sleeping enough. They're not drinking enough water. They're just not doing the things that they should be doing, but it's because life has gotten a hold of them, right? Like it's even easy for me. I'm a husband, I'm a father of four. It's easy for me to let go of what I got to do on a daily basis, right?
Right.
So I got a
Right.
big old water cup in my hand. I slept 7 hours last night. I trained this morning with my friend Chris Bearcat. I already ate 2 meals, feel fantastic, but it's not always easy to juggle all that when you got so much stuff going on. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? And so, knowingly or unknowingly, the under ingestion of, I guess you would say, the intentional or unintentional calorie deficit is the primary driver for a lot of this stuff.
Okay. Okay.
Some
Absolutely.
people want to blame genetics and stuff like that. Um, but being somebody that comes from a very obese family, I can tell you that in many cases, people use genetics as an excuse. There are a lot of things that you can do to optimize yourself right now so that you don't pass on your crappy genetics to your children. Like, so you got to think about what can I do to optimize my genetics right now to provide my children with the best possible outcome that they can have. You know what I mean? Instead of
Absolutely.
saying I'm massively out of shape and so I go ahead and let's start a family and then my kids are out of shape. You know what I'm saying? There's always something that we can do.
I love that perspective. So it really sounds like, again, with everything we're discussing here, it's very much driven by, and I don't think we can separate these two, but spending a huge amount of time, again, when we're talking about hormonal dysregulation, having trouble losing body fat, things of that nature, or potentially even gaining body fat and you don't understand why. Sounds like a large amount of that is driven by spending excessive time in a calorie deficit, whether you realize it or not, lifestyle factors. And again, I don't know that we can necessarily separate those two. Would you say that's pretty accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, I
Cool.
would.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then when we're looking at a client who, hey, I want to lose body fat, what are some signs or red flags that you're looking at that kind of tell you, hey, you're not in a position for us to push you into a fat loss phase?
Mm. The main things that I look for. Yeah, I would say, I mean, I think the individual needs to basically make sure that they're spending an ample amount of time eating the adequate amount of calories before they would even consider a fat loss phase, right? Like, I know that there's some people that, they'll bring people in marketing fat loss, right? And there's everybody
Hmm.
does a fat loss challenge. It's like, all right, everybody's going to do the same fat loss challenge. But
Right.
some people will be quote unquote successful in that push or that loading of stress because they're responsive, they're healthy, which we can talk about. But there's other people that will not be responsive, right? And so the things that I probably go say I'm going to look for is going to be having them at a high calorie intake relative to them. So there's some women that I can get up to 25, 27, even 3,000 calories a day. I would say the average is probably 2,000 to 2,400 though.
Okay.
Being optimized, having their health locked in, like blood work is good, like everything's good. I would also say no negative biofeedback on an MSQ, right? So, like, if you decide to start a fat loss phase, and the individual that you're prepping or coaching already has GI problems, you think those GI problems are going to get better? No, they're probably going to get worse, right? And so we have to be mindful that if we're looking at an MSQ, we're identifying internal health problems. And so with those types of individuals, I would definitely say don't start a fat loss phase if they have GI or gut health problems. Okay. I would say they should be ideally as strong as possible. Meaning that maybe they're breaking PRs in the gym, their performance is really, really good. They're not having a bunch of slumps in energy throughout the day, like signs of insulin resistance or something like that, or signs of like adrenal insufficiency or adrenal fatigue or anything like that. Making sure that they have really good quality sleep, they're drinking enough water, they're tracking their macros, they're spot on. They've got trust established with the coach, and ultimately the coach trusts them to be able to track their macros perfectly. Um, and then a caveat that I'll add in there is identifying like women that are utilizing birth control. So I don't have anything against women that choose to utilize birth control. If you're educated and you know why you're using it and you still decide to use it, by all means, you do your thing.
Right.
But I'll also add that from my experience over 13 years, depending on the type of birth control utilized, I've noticed it just makes fat loss a little bit harder. So in normal cases, you would maybe not wouldn't have to push somebody as hard, but whenever they're on birth control, I've noticed I do have to push them a bit harder than maybe I would expect I would have to.
Okay. And is that simply due to just again the changes we're going to see in estrogen, progesterone, things of that nature, or why is that?
Well, so birth control is interesting in the fact that, most of them, most of the ones that are being utilized are, exogenous estrogen and progestins, right? So if you're providing a already estrogen dominant woman more estrogen, what do you think happens to her body fat patterns and where she stores body fat in her hormonal profile? She probably becomes estrogen dominant. And I would argue that birth control makes a lot of women estrogen dominant, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too deep down that, but
That's perfectly fine.
it depends on the person.
Okay.
And I would say even more important is when women decide to come off. That's a big problem as well, because when women decide to come off of birth control for whatever reason, let's say maybe they're on birth control from 18 to 27, right? And then they decide at 27, hey, I would like to consider having a family and having some kids and stuff like that. This is, in my opinion, where a lot of the hormonal chaos starts to occur. Specifically because when you come off birth control, there's usually only three things that can happen. One of them is, like I told you before, you go androgen dominant, which puts women at a very high risk of developing some form of PCOS, which there's depends on how you look at it, but typically there's about four different types of PCOS. And then you also have women that'll go estrogen dominant. And then you have some women that'll just be completely flatlined, meaning that they're not producing any estrogen. Progesterone is like a 0.3, 0.5, and testosterone is in the dump. So ultimately, then we have to focus on how do we get them back to being healthy where they're actually producing these hormones. And I think that for a lot of women out there, the reason that they go flatline is because they started taking birth control at such a young age that the hypothalamus and the pituitary and all of that, it never even signaled that they had to start creating it. You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
like, so like, 14 years old, I think is probably the youngest that I've seen. But at 14 years old, very few and far between are producing a lot of sex hormones. You know what I mean?
Right.
So if you shut those pathways off before, they're even start to produce it, well, how hard is it going to be for it to actually register that they need to produce it when they're 25? Very hard, right? So then that becomes a functional nutrition case where we have to dive in. We have to go ahead and have them complete an MSQ. We have to ask them extensively how they're feeling, so on and so forth. Really, we're looking for negative biofeedback, and then we're going ahead and we're addressing labs, and then we essentially would have to create a protocol on how we could help them bring those things back. Because until they get them things back, I mean, it's a very tough road. Of if you want to conceive, that's even harder. If you just want to be hormonally healthy and build muscle and lose fat, makes it a lot harder. So those are some things that I would say just as considerations for birth control. But if you're currently on birth control, I'm not telling you to come off of it. I'm just telling you to educate yourself. A book called Beyond the Pill is a fantastic book. I'd highly recommend your female audience listen to that one. But in general, I would say that being on birth control, because of the fact it makes you estrogen dominant, does make losing body fat a bit more challenging.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely. That's very insightful. And I apologize. I kind of derailed us from the original
Oh, you're
topic there.
good. You're good.
But to bring it back then to what we were discussing before, as far as signs to not enter a fat loss phase. So it sounds like, as a whole, again, we want to have calories in a good place. We want to have strength in
Hmm.
a good place. We want to be
Yeah.
looking for positive biofeedback. We want to make sure, like, if we are taking an MSQ, that we're not seeing anything glaring or any negative feedback there.
Right.
How common would you say it is that for female specifically, that you bring on a female client and she's immediately ready for a fat loss phase, or is that something that happens?
It happens. And when it
Okay.
happens, I am super happy. I've recently I've been blessed this year, and I know all of them. I'm not going to name drop them on the podcast. But I currently work with a limited roster of people. And whenever somebody comes in and they're like, "Listen, William, I found your information like 12 months ago, 18 months ago, whatever it is. And I decided that I needed to commit to making sure I'm feeding my body properly, training hard, getting strong, building muscle, sleeping well, all that stuff." And then they come to me a year later and they're like, "Hey, I haven't dieted for 12 months." Like, those are the ones that will respond so incredibly well.
Right.
Um, Early on in my coaching career, um, I just didn't know what I didn't know. Yeah, and I'm totally cool with talking about the mistakes because I know there's probably going to be some coaches that are going to listen to this, whether they be from my audience or from your audience. And a lot of the time, early on, nobody knew how long somebody needed to reverse diet for. I would even beg to argue nowadays people still don't know how long people actually need to reverse diet for. But early on, I was like, all right, we're going to reverse diet for 3 months and it's gonna, you're gonna be good to go. And I remember putting people into a fat loss phase and they didn't respond. Specifically ladies. They didn't
Right.
respond very well. And I'm like, what the heck's going on here? Like, well, why not? And I got up the bat so many times and struck out that I said, I got to go to 6 months. It's just not long enough. When I think about my bodybuilding off seasons, they're long. They're like a year.
Mm-hmm.
So if I could just get people to commit to 6 months, maybe it'd be good. Every time I got up the plate, my batting got better. Okay. So what I mean by that is we started to have success. But the longer I committed to, the more successful my clients were. Right. And so yeah, I would say like in terms of reverse dieting and stuff like that, you really need to put yourself in a position where you can eat high amounts of calories for at least 6 to 12 months, even maybe before you hire a coach. Or if you need a coach to kind of guide you through that process, which I have a lot of people that are doing that exact same thing, I would definitely recommend you contact somebody that you trust to guide you through it. Because I can tell you that based off of the women that have not eaten up for 12 months before they contact me, it's usually the hardest thing that they go through in their quote unquote dieting life
Right.
is feeding them more, getting them to understand they're trying to become the strongest version of themselves, right? Getting them to actually believe in themselves, getting them to identify themselves as strong women versus, being told by society, you got to be skinny, you got to eat less, you got to, you have to be light on the scale. The certain number defines who you are. None of that crap. I try to get my women to understand that they are strong and that we're actually feeding them so they can build muscle for the rest of their life. And I think it's something else to take a look at as well is if you ever look up information via Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, she's huge in the longevity space, protein metabolism space. Um, Talks a lot about muscle being the organ of longevity. She's a phenomenal resource of information. I'd strongly advise any woman listening to this to go check her information out because she preaches a high protein diet and resistance training. And it's like if I could help women do anything, I think that's it. Like get them to eat more protein, get them to fill all the vitamin and mineral gaps, get them to support their physiology and make them the strongest versions of themselves.
I love that. So in this reverse dieting phase, it
Mm-hmm.
sounds, first of all, this committing to that for 6 to 12 months, where we're spending more time eating more food, we're spending time focusing on getting stronger.
Yeah.
That in itself, I think, is one of the hardest pills for most people to swallow, because I know I
Mm-hmm.
have this conversation with most every new client that starts with us is like, hey, I want to get lean, I want to lose fat, and
Yep.
I want to be here in 3 to 6 months. And it's like, hey, realistically, that's going to be more like a year to year and a half. Are you okay
Mm-hmm.
with that? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Conversation we have quite frequently. But within this reverse dieting process, Are you trying to ramp calories up as high as possible over the course of that 6 to 12 months while maintaining body fat? Is it oftentimes a situation where we're okay with like gaining some body fat and maybe turning into more of like a building phase, so to speak? What is that like for you
Mm-hmm.
typically?
Yeah, so when we bring a client into the educated dieter, our system's a little different than maybe what you're explaining. So I want to make sure that it's clear. Um,
Absolutely.
when people come in, we don't just say you need to reverse diet. Personally, because we have a functional nutrition side of my business, we
Hmm.
have a hormone expert on our staff. We have affiliations with other individuals, whether they're ARMPs or doctors that can essentially help us out and kind of understanding a lot more about the functional nutrition side. Um, the first pillar inside of our transformation process is restoration, right? What I
Okay.
mean by that is if they are a functional case, meaning that they've identified on the MSQ, they're 30 or more, they got a bunch of functional problems, we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with a restoration process, meaning that we're addressing things like your liver health, your GI health, your adrenal health, all that stuff. We're basically kind of quote unquote, we're like flushing the system to make sure that the system is as optimal as possible. Then from that point in time, then we would go into either, and keep in mind, GI issues are typically solved during that first few months.
Okay.
Secondly, to that, then you're talking about hormone balance issues, which again, if we've gotten blood work done and we see that the ratios of all are off or they're suboptimal or whatever it might be, then we can create a protocol to essentially help them get their natural, levels back up to par. And then from that point, usually after those two stages, if they are a functional nutrition client, they're feeling way better, right? And maybe that's a 8, 12 week or longer process. So sometimes even 6 months. consider it like consider it like a reverse diet almost in a sense, because at the same time we're focusing on internal functional health things, we're also feeding them up, and then we're supplementing with things to basically fill gaps that we've seen in blood work, because I'm not a big fan of just throwing stuff at people that they don't need, right? I
Right.
want to look at the labs, I want to see what do you actually need, and then from that point in time we'll go ahead and we'll create your protocol. So then hormone balance is after that, and then here we go, now we're in a position where they can actually build muscle. So this is where basically the reverse diet process would come in, where we're focusing on trying to feed them up to get them at least to a theoretical maintenance. But in the feeding up process, our goal is not to have you gain a bunch of fat. Okay. Now, there's caveats to this, and there's information that needs to be talked about. So if it's maybe a post fat loss, very, very lean person, do they need to gain some
Hmm.
fat? Yeah, of course. Absolutely. If it's a woman that's coming in and she's like, lean body mass is like 100 pounds, maybe less, and she's like 160, 170, 180, does she need to gain a bunch of fat? No. Right. So our goal during a reverse diet is not to have the women that are in that position 140, 150, 160, 170, somewhere around there, even 200 pounds or more. Our goal is not to have them gain weight during a reverse diet. Now, will sometimes they gain some weight because they're actually feeding themselves properly. They're actually, for once in their life, starting to build muscle. It's possible, but we have to make sure we draw some kind of proverbial line in the sand to say, I understand you're already in this position. We don't want you to supersede this position, because ultimately the more fat we gain is the more fat we're going to have to lose later on anyway. So I would almost rather try to experience a form of body recomposition during that time, which when you're actually getting people back to health and you got them resistance training, you got them walking, you got them feeding properly, you got them doing all the right things, that's actually very highly likely to happen in relatively sedentary or untrained people. And then from that point, once they've developed this health, um, then from that point, we could basically take them into a lean phase, which is like a fat loss journey, or maybe you say, hey, I want to help you lose 20 pounds and get you down to your pre-baby weight or a weight you feel comfortable at or whatever. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create that protocol for them. And then once we get them down there, then it's about maintaining the result. And then once they can maintain the result with higher calories, no negative hormonal adaptation, then it's about thriving. And then once they hit that point, if they want to stay with us, fantastic. If they don't want to stay with us, because they're like, look, you've equipped me with so much knowledge, information, education, da 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 da, I think I can go off on my own. That is the biggest blessing in what we do, I feel like, is being able to guide people through that entire process, have them go off on their own, and then 6 months, 12 months, a year and a half, 2 years later, they still email you and say, hey, just want to let you know I'm still in a great spot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's what our journey looks like, all the way from the base of the pyramid all the way to the top.
Okay. Okay. And that is such an incredible feeling. Again, those clients that stay in touch when you know they're continuing to crush it. But it sounds like essentially then your process is first and foremost, we're focusing on health, right? Before we
Mm-hmm.
necessarily enter. Go ahead.
Yeah, unless the individual comes in and they're already healthy.
Right.
Now, I've air quoted the word health like 5 times on this podcast so far, and I want to define it. Okay. So, for all the listeners out there, I personally feel like health is the ability to respond to an applied stress on the system, right?
Okay.
Applied stressor, extra cardio, calorie deficit, resistance training, these people are responders. We bring in a lot of people that are already responders. Like that gal that I talked to you about that was, eating 2,000 calories or more for 12 months. You think I have to worry about all that other stuff?
Right.
No, of course not. It's the biggest blessing ever. So she came in, we've optimized her calories. She came in at 2,000. I got her up to like 2,750 already, right? And then we're getting ready to start a fat loss phase next month. And I'm super excited about it because I know she's going to respond great, right? So health, the ability to respond to an applied demand or stress on the system. What health is not, if you apply that stress and the individual does not respond, that's how I define healthy. Okay. So these people with severe GI problems, maybe it's hypothyroidism, severe metabolic adaptation, whatever it might be, you put them on the same protocol and they're not responding. Why is that? So they're not healthy enough to take on the stressor of the response.
That makes complete sense. Okay. So with that, for an individual who is listening to this and thinking, shit, that's me, right? I am not healthy. I don't respond to whatever I do. What do you typically recommend? Like when someone reaches out, like, hey, where do you start? Is it like go get blood work? Is it simply like reach out to a coach and find someone to guide you? What's
Mm-hmm.
kind of your thought process there?
Yeah, if they're in that position, first and foremost, so inside of the educated dieter, we believe that education creates adherence, consistency, all that. And as long as you can keep the person consistent and adherent, they'll achieve their result, right? But education's number one. So personally, I believe that they have to identify they even have a problem, right? What is the
Right.
issue? Um, Reality is there's a lot of women out there that, they're looking at all these, very fit gals on social media. And the second one of them posts like a juice detox 14-day challenge, dude, they're all over it, you know, but it's because they're uneducated. So, how do we promote education? I think it has to be done via podcasts like this, via courses that you can create, available content. We have to become better at marketing and getting our message in front of the right people at the right time. Because ultimately, nowadays, like most people, correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremiah, but most people know what macros are,
Right.
right? Most people know that they should probably be tracking them just for consistency reasons. If you're not in a fat loss phase, trying to build muscle, whatever, just track them for consistency reasons. Back in 2010, nobody knew what tracking macros was. And I had to convince people. I literally had to convince them, like, I can do this on the computer. What? What do you mean you can't? How are you going to coach me on the computer? I'm like, I can do this on the computer and we're going to be tracking macros. And like, oh, you're just another calorie counting guy. I'm like, no, you don't understand, because I knew about the system inside of the idea, right?
Right.
And the system being like, basically keeping the body healthy during fat loss phases and so on. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming easier to explain because people are getting smarter, right? But again, back in 2010, like it was hard for us to really convince people that they needed to track their macros because nobody was doing it. But nowadays, it's becoming a lot easier because people are absorbing content so often.
It's truly crazy how much the industry has changed. Like when I was first getting into fitness as a whole, it was like before there was even Instagram. And I know I was going and like taking, dude would post his workouts on Twitter every day. And that's like would be my training for session for the day. It's just crazy to
Totally.
see how much that has changed.
Yeah,
Uh,
totally. Totally.
as far as then, so we've kind of talked through setting a foundation, making sure health is in a good place. When we are in a fat loss phase, are there any like quote unquote best practices you like to make sure are, I believe you mentioned you called it a lean phase, like are
Mm.
part of a lean phase, be it like, hey, we're making sure you're getting these micronutrients, we're introducing refeeds, diet breaks. Is there anything that you would consider like best practices for putting together a fat loss phase for a female athlete while maintaining health? Longest question, but does that all make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot to unpack, but we'll get started. Um, the very first thing that I personally feel like, and I know when people hear lean phase, they maybe just think like, oh, it's a calorie deficit for a prolonged period of time. In my understanding of what a lean phase is, that is not it. I was having a phenomenal conversation with Dr. Bill Campbell maybe last month, and we were talking about the ins and the outs of various protocols that we could utilize and some of the things that we were utilizing inside my business to basically help people kind of maintain lean body mass and so on. And the thing is like, I think that the overarching concept is managing stressors on the system. I
Okay.
think that's the overarching idea is how do you better manage stress on the body during a fat loss phase? Because we know it's inevitable. Metabolic adaptations are going to happen depending on how long you diet for and how lean you get. Now, if you're 300 pounds and you're listening to this podcast, you can lose a lot of weight before you ever have to worry about some form of metabolic adaptation. But if you're, a lean, relatively lean, fit gal, maybe 20, 25, 30% body fat, somewhere around there, or a guy and you're 15 to 20% body fat, eventually you're going to stall out. And I think that we have to start to begin to open the conversation with what are mitigation strategies that nutrition coaches and or clients can utilize to keep the wheel spinning, right?
Right.
Because if we don't use anything to keep the wheel spinning, the wheel eventually slows down and then it becomes harder to break past those speed bumps later on. So I would say managing stress is going to be the number one thing. And how do we manage stress? I think is pretty simple. Um, I want to create a system around this, but I don't have one in place yet. So basically what it is it's making sure you're creating adequate amounts of sleep and or rest time. So having like a good sound nighttime routine, good solid morning routine, making sure you're getting enough sleep. Next is basically going to be making sure that inside of the idea of eating calories and tracking your macros, that you're having some form of a high carb, low carb strategy in place. If for nothing else, the psychological benefit of giving yourself something to actually look forward to. Now, I will say for women, the multiple day refeeds and the, 3 high, 4 low, and the 2 high, 5 low, those work better for females, in my opinion. Um, and men, do they need them? Man, it's debatable. But I would say that if they want to maintain intramuscular glycogen levels and performance and strength and muscle mass during a fat loss phase, they should use them. But for the sake of the rest of what I'll talk about, I'll only kind of put it towards the female demographic. Resting them, again, a bit more. And what I mean by resting is adjusting training demands. Okay. So if you're having them train 5 days a week, consider during the diet breaks that you would provide maybe every 5 pounds lost or every 10 pounds lost or every 20 pounds lost, consider utilizing a diet break, increasing primarily via glucose, so adding more carbohydrate. As an example, if the individual is on 120 carbs on the low days, you'd probably bump them up to like 240, 250, all right,
Okay.
or at least over 200, somewhere around there. And doing that for anywhere from 5, 7, 10, 14 days or longer, depending on them, what they want, what they like, and what their end goal is. Like I have a girl right now who's been on a quote unquote diet break for like 3 months, right? But it's because she's basically taking a long break before the final push for a wedding. You know what I mean?
Right.
But we had already dropped a significant amount of fat. And I'm like, look, we probably only got like 7, 8 pounds to go and we
Right.
had like 4 months. I'm not going to keep pushing you for 4 more months because I know adaptations are going to happen. She's already lean, right?
Right.
And so I said, let's just go ahead. Let's basically take a break. I'm going to bump you back up 200, 250 carbs a day and, take your training down a little bit, only train 3 days a week and run that for months. And she's ran that for 3 months. We just put her back in a deficit and the weight's just fallen off. So I would definitely say that in terms of training volume, again, if they're on 5 day split, consider 3 or 4 days. If they're doing three, 4 sets. Consider knocking it down to 2 sets during that specific time. And then if you need to, you could consider adding in some supplementation. I've done our own like inside my company, like individual case studies on some of my clients, and I've walked them
Hmm.
through this whole process. And depending on their blood work, it'll dictate what you need to fill. But, I don't think it's a bad idea to supplement with things that can help optimize thyroid function, things that can help to optimize sex hormone production, things that can help calm the system down, like maybe magnesium or chaseberry, something like that. Um, and yeah, I mean, usually those are the things that I'm considering doing, like inside of a diet break. But the carbohydrate cycling strategies, that's another deal. So depending on what the person needs, obviously you can create that plan of action. But the more fat they have, one refeed every 7 to 14 days, and then once I start to get leaner, maybe 2 refeeds a week, something like that. Maybe once I start to get even leaner, like I have a gal getting ready to compete. She's 4 weeks out right now, and she only diets 4 days a week. The other days
Damn.
are she's basically eating at maintenance, and then I've also have a lot of the gals that I've been training as of late, which I don't have a big pool of data on this because I'm always experimenting with stuff. But she only does calorie deficits on her off days from training, right?
Okay.
So now she's training 4 days a week and she's eating over 200 grams of carbs on those days. But then on the calorie deficit days, those are the days she does cardio and low carbs, right? So I'm still working that out, but there's so many different things you can do. Even for people that are like, maybe type 2 diabetic or 250, 300 pounds or more, like the Matador study was a phenomenal study where basically it was like 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. So I think it was a 35% deficit or something like that for 2 weeks, and then they refilled calories back up to theoretical maintenance at the time for 2 weeks. And basically 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. And the gal that I just posted about this morning, I did a reel on her. She lost 50 pounds only dieting like 15 days out of the month because it works for her and her lifestyle
Okay.
you know
Okay.
so yeah, I mean, to summarize that, there's a lot to unpack, but if your audience is interested, we have a free ebook available on our website, theeducatedDieter.com, and it's
Mhm.
called The Guide to Dieting Smarter, and it is free.
Okay, absolutely. I'll link that up in the show notes as well to make sure the
All right.
audience can grab that. And as you said, there's a lot to unpack there, but it sounds like, in a nutshell, it is focusing on managing the stressors and not just looking at it as, okay, if we're not responding to the stressor, let's add more of the stressor, but
Yeah.
potentially let's take some time to pull back. And that may be like introducing some supplementation may help. It may be a diet break. It may be things of refeeds. And it sounds like refeeds specifically are something you use pretty frequently with clients.
I mean, pretty much every fat loss phase. I don't usually put together a fat loss plan of action without a refeed of some sort. But
Okay.
then again, you're talking about refeeds, you're opening up a toolbox.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
what do I decide? What do I
Okay.
choose?
So within that, are you still typically pushing for like a 0.5 to 1% rate of loss per week? And I know this is going to depend quite a bit on the client as well, but do you find like you're
Yeah,
getting more aggressive the rest of the week, or it's like, hey, we're
yeah,
managing stress, so the clients just respond better and we don't have to get overly aggressive the rest of the week?
yeah. So it's definitely important to provide some validation for the context of who you're coaching, right?
Right.
I wouldn't say I have to get more aggressive. I would just say that for many people, when they hire a coach for fat loss, like they're very eager to lose it as fast as possible, right?
Hmm.
I'm not the fastest possible guy.
Okay.
What I am, though, is I'm very into helping people create life transformation to where they can lose the weight and actually keep it off. What I've noticed is that the more aggressive you are, or the less frequently you can spike the metabolism, once training performance starts to go down a bit, that's typically where you start to lose muscle. The number one way to experience some form of metabolic adaptation is to lose lean tissue, right?
Right.
This has been studied. So, but I would say, yeah, I always assemble a plan of action for fat loss with some type of a diet break, high carb day, something like that. And I would say that it does a very good job at helping people manage stress on the system. But it also provides the ability for people psychologically to know that they have something to look forward to, which ultimately could prevent them from experiencing some type of a binge episode after 3, 4, 12 weeks of a fat loss phase with another coach, you know. I also think it keeps fat loss going. So again, I'll give you an example. If you can manage cortisol, call them cortisol resets if you want to, but if you can manage stress on the system, I think you can keep fat loss going. So um, I was contacted by a gal. She ended up coaching with us, but I was contacted by a gal that worked with another fitness influencer for like 12 months, right? She signed
Mhm.
her on for a whole year up front, right? And the gal sent her some macros. And for the first 6 months, the woman responded, but she never gave her a high carb day. She never gave her a diet break. She never considered anything. It was just if you're still dropping, we're not changing anything, right? If it ain't
Right.
broke, don't fix it. And ultimately, after 6 months, she had lost like 30 pounds, right? And then by month 8, she realized I'm stuck. Like I haven't lost another pound. I lost 30 pounds. And now ever since then, I've pretty much maintained this 30-pound loss, but my calories haven't changed. Contacts the coach, and the coach says, look, you've lost 30 pounds. Like, I don't expect you to keep losing weight forever, but just keep your macros the same. Right. And so literally keeps her macros the same. She kept her macros the same for an entire year. Interesting thing happened though. At month 9, she started to gain weight. And people say, well, how's that possible? I'm not going to say it was anything other than maybe she just couldn't keep dieting, right? Like maybe her
Right.
willpower got the best of her. Maybe she started overeating. Maybe even she got to the point where she started to develop some GI problems that created, an accumulation of potential estrobolome in the gut. Maybe she became estrogen dominant. Maybe her hormones started to become suboptimal, at which time nobody was there to help her through that process. Right. And so when she contacted me after 3 months, she had gained back 35 pounds, lost 30, maintained because nothing changed, gained 35 pounds back. And now she's like, look, it's been a year and I'm 35 pounds up from where I started, or 5 pounds up from where I started. And, that's what I see most of the time is people that have done it, they're being pushed. And so what I want to be able to do is say, well, what can we do that's educated, that provides you a better understanding of dieting and actually gives you something to look forward to?
Right.
Like I personally, I can't go on low carbohydrate to lose body fat without having a high carb day. Like I feel like complete crap. If I don't get a
Right.
high carb day, I feel like crap. I get irritable. My training performance goes to crap. I don't look as good because I'm not full anymore, right? So if we could just add that in and it's beneficial, even psychologically, even if it wasn't beneficial physiologically, what's the problem in that? I think the issue is that people want to lose it so fast, and nutrition coaches want to provide such fast results that they miss out on the long-term vision, right? They'd rather say, I help you lose 20 pounds in 3 months, right? Or, hey, I'm looking for this many people that want to lose this much weight in this many days. And it's
Right.
like, it's sexy. I get it. Like you're using it as a marketing strategy, and I understand. However, in my opinion, if you really want to be able to create lifelong change, it doesn't happen in a short amount of time. Because the whole process here is you have to educate them on how to maintain the weight that they've lost. Right. So that's my opinion on it. And I think that the more you diet, the more that you feed the body inside of a diet, the more likely they are to actually maintain their adherence.
I love it. But it sounds very much as a client and a coach, you have to be willing to play the long game, right? You have to be willing to say, hey, this might be much more than a 3 month process, losing 30 pounds in 90 days or whatever it may be. But again, we have to be willing to look at a year, 2 years, a longer time frame in
Yeah.
order to actually be able to keep that result and kind of get off of this cycle of yo-yo dieting. Man, this has
Yeah.
been such a great conversation. It's such a different perspective than I think there are more and more perspectives like this in the industry as of late, but still
Mm,
just such a different
yeah.
approach that you take versus what most people I think are still hearing on social media. So I know the listeners are gonna have taken a ton of value from this. Before I let you go, man, will you please let everyone know anything you'd like to plug, where they can apply for coaching with your team, anything of that nature? And I'll link all this up in the
Yeah,
show notes
sure,
as well.
man. Well, I want to say I really appreciate you having me on. Obviously, I want to highlight you for just the work that you're doing. Obviously, I know that you operate a coaching business, and I believe you have a team of assistant coaches. And it's incredible to know that there's a lot of other coaches inside of the evidence-based coaching space that are doing good work. So, with that being said, if anybody's interested in following me, you can find me on Instagram. It's William_Grazione. I also am the host of the Hey Coach Radio podcast. I haven't uploaded a video in a long time, but I do have a YouTube channel. You can find me. It's William Grazione. And then I'm also on Facebook. Our website's theeducatedDieter.com. There's a lot of free products there. And then if you're a coach listening to this that's interested in education, we have advanced coaching systems. And then I also created a course specifically just for women. It is an 11-part education course that talks about everything that I talked about today on the podcast, and that is available as well.
Incredible. I will link all that up in the show notes. And again, my man, thank you for being here.
You're very welcome, dude. I appreciate your time.